Hey everyone, it's Dr. Rick. So today's tutorial is on nutrition and the neurodegenerative disease called Alzheimer's disease. I just did a video on MS and nutrition, and I think it was very important to, at least if you're my patients, or if you're hitting the wall and you have had side effects to all the medicines of MS, I thought it was important to talk about nutrition in that regard. But in this regard, I am just happening to finish my fasting mimicking diet. This is Prolon. I'm using the box. I plan to next month do nutrition balancing or just the whole food approach to 5-day fasting mimicking. And I have muscled my way through the 5 days of the FMD, and I'm feeling really good compared to the last 20 years. And I've gone from pescatarian to vegetarian to vegan to intermittent fasting. So this has been the most impactful. I haven't had this kind of muscle responsiveness in 20 years, and my waist is as small as it's been in 20 years. So I think there's great value in using nutrition properly. And you don't have to do fasting, but if you look at the data, I had a guy that came in, what prompted all this was I had a guy who came in the other day, and he was coming in for medical cannabis. And I asked him, because he was suffering from back pain and memory disorder and poor sleep. And I asked him, okay, we can do that, but you always have to tidy up your lifestyle. So I asked him how much alcohol he drinks. He says 2 drinks every night. Then I asked him if he's on a special diet. He says, no, I eat anything I want. And so we had some conversations about sugar, its effects on memory, and I don't know if he's willing to do that, but he was willing to at least get the cannabis for the sleep. So it's really important because average American diet, also known as the Western diet, I really believe it adds to the majority of diseases that you see in a doctor's office. So if you think about it, 2/3 of America is overweight, and with that comes disease, usually high blood pressure, cholesterol, pre-diabetes, or just full-blown diabetes. And with all those, they lead to problems down the line. Heart attack and neurodegenerative disorders and cancer are the top 3 killers in America. And they suck all the money out of the federal system and the insurance companies and your pockets and my pockets. Not only to mention, also that you don't want to have anybody of a loved one suffer, because it's just terrible when you see anybody go through Alzheimer's disease. And it all starts very subtly. Even just with a little bit of a memory issue. And it doesn't have to be after a major concussion. This is my ice climbing helmet that I use every once in a while. Don't go ice climbing too often, but I have a picture in one of my rooms, room 2, if you've ever been there, in my office. And it's important to use this when you're climbing in case ice or rocks fall. It's also important to use helmets when you're riding a bike. It's also important not to get into fights because there's problems. Oh, even soccer players. Before, with leather balls and soccer players and wet conditions, that ball would be heavy. So anytime you gave a header, there was a high association between FIFA or World Cup soccer players and concussions. The same as dementia pugilistica, like with Muhammad Ali, who made it popular. But a lot of our boxers and MMA guys and young guys that go get into fights every weekend, they're running the risk of early onset Alzheimer's disease, or something that looks like it. So I wanted to talk about how you might be able to prevent it in your own way before you have to go to the doctor's office, before you have to suffer from it. So I put together a couple of reports. This one, I think you can see it there. So this is from Tufts University, and it is about the Western diet that activates glial cells. Glial cells are little cells in the brain that are responsible for irritating or at least influencing inflammation in the brain. So if you want to look it up, there. And you can look at your own studies up on NIH's website. That's a non-biased organization that is very hard to publish with, but when a peer review says it's good, you can publish. So staying on the Western diet, not good. It causes problems with inflammation at the least, just marked by glial cells. And glial cells are those cells in the brain. And if they're overactive, they can cause problems with inflammation. And one of the biggest things with Alzheimer's disease is that The typical way we find it is obviously when you have a memory issue that's popping up with an older person or younger person. Neurologist would probably want to get an MRI of the brain. Kind of like the same process with the fatigue or the numbness and tingling or the eye findings in MS. When the MRI comes back and it shows plaque formation, or even more deeper than that, possible biopsy showing tau bodies, then that's usually sine qua non for, with the memory issue, sine qua non for Alzheimer's disease. And then usually you're put into very high or intensive neuropsychiatric programs in addition to some medicines, and they kind of work, they kind of don't. They can help to improve, but not postpone the inevitable. And that's why it's important before you get to that point, like especially if you have a history of Alzheimer's disease in the family, or you're ApoE positive, that's a gene test you can get. I wouldn't wait till your symptoms come up. I would start trying to figure out getting away from the Western diet, first of all. And yeah, you're going to have to invest. Even if you're not obese, you still should get away from the Western diet if you have a history of those diseases. Not only just Alzheimer's disease, but MS or heart attack or stroke, cancer. So Western diet just adds too much crap. Here are another comment. This is from authored by head author, primary investigator Dr. Wall. Calorie restriction, and calorie restriction is important too. Not just so. What I would do if I have some patients that come in and say, I'm not going to change, like that guy the other day. Fine, and he's 82, so he's probably not going to change, at least until he sees the benefit, and if it increases his memory. Because I have a feeling that the medical cannabis is going to help his sleep, maybe help with his back pain, but it's not going to change his memory unless the memory is from his sleep issue. But he can maximize on it by stopping the crap, like alcohol and bad eating, and maybe restricting calories. So the calorie restriction that you see, again, if you want to, I hope you can see this without too much glare. Yeah. Calorie restriction is known to, at least if you do it properly, known to help stop or regulate the amount of crap that's being made in the body. So, without getting too deep into the weeds, every cell has mitochondria. That's a powerhouse of the cell. I think I showed that on the MS one, if I'm not mistaken. My son's a little model of a cell. And mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. They allow glucose to get in, they convert the electrons from, they make electrons from glucose, and they send them to the electron transport chain, and you have energy. But in addition to that, you also trigger, depending on nutrient-sensitive pathways in every cell, you also trigger a couple of other things like mTOR, sirtuins, AMPK, and then IGF-1 or insulin. And everybody knows insulin, and if you've been reading or watching The Scientist, mTOR and AMPK are also popular. Sirtuins, that's a new concept, but it's also, they're all bad. So if you turn them on, it increases your chances for crap to occur later on down the line. You're not going to notice it like after a meal. You're not going to notice overwhelming improvement after a nutritional, the first days of a nutritional change either, but to change and to at least control the fuel that you normally take in, and if it's crappy and you normally take in crappy fuel, you're going to have a poor running car. But if you have a Ferrari or a Porsche and you put in the best fuel in the world, then your car will run like it's made to run. And I think most humans are made to fight cancer. I have, unfortunately, 2 patients now that are fighting and battling cancer, and it's a tough battle, but we are trying as much as possible to at least make the symptoms better with the chemo and the radiation, and maybe improve the chances for cells to the body to work on its own. So the study was pretty decent, and it pointed to the fact that if you calorie restrict, you will have a reaction in the body. Kind of like if you've ever watched my fasting mimicking diet lectures or tutorials, same concept. If you do that 5-day fast, or if you just do intermittent fasting, it will all lead to the same improvement. All those cancer cells, or those precancer cells or those senescent cells that are about to change into something bad, it'll push them over the edge and into autophagy, where the body just breaks everything down, utilizes the building blocks, and makes new cells, which is what we're supposed to do. But again, if you have nothing but bad crap in you, then the body is just so irritated with tolerating and being exposed to the bad crap. Now, whether it's pesticides, milk, hormones in your milk, meat with antibiotics, anything, or just foods that you're allergic to. If you find more of them in the Western diet, get off the Western diet and do some education, or try to find your way with a good diet. And it doesn't have to be plant-based. You can have any diet in the world, but as long as you have somebody helping you navigate it, design it, and maintain it, I think that's reasonable. Registered dietitians are very good. Some life coaches are also very good, or other people who have been just successful with their own docs. Maybe they have a formula they can lend you, and you can apply it or try it on. So, good study. I think that it showed that too much calcium, bottom line is that too much crap in you will turn on the mitochondria in the wrong way. Because when you would figure if you have too much stuff in you, say glucose, and you eat overabundance of glucose, carbohydrates, grains, well, the body can process that stuff, but all that fuel has to be processed by a specific cell. And in the specific cell, the organelle is the mitochondria that processes that fuel. And when the mitochondria turns it into energy for either using now or storage later, the only disadvantage that that little powerhouse, it also makes free radicals, or ROS, reactive oxygen species. And that is dangerous. Those are like that's like radiation inside your body that tends to touch, because the mitochondria are next to the nucleus. The nucleus is where the DNA is. So you would figure enough mitochondria being fed way too much fuel all the time, non-stop, day and night, middle of the night snack, and bad fuel at that, when it has to process all that stuff, it lets off all those free radicals, reactive oxygen species, and that's super close to the DNA. And the DNA is the encoded structure or helix that's supposed to give you more and more cells, pass on your genetics to your kids. And if those cells are being bombarded by free radicals, it's easier to change into cancer. And in this case, it can change into tau bodies or amyloid. And those are the two things that, as I mentioned before, a neurologist or primary care doctor would like to find on an MRI to say you now have Alzheimer's disease. So if you can stop that from forming, better for you. You can at least delay it or turn off the possibility 100%. So again, I mentioned Walter Longo because I've been following him since he released his book, Longevity Diet. I don't have it here at home, but I did this by a fluke. A friend of mine, wanted to go on the 5-day fasting mimicking diet. I said, I'll do it. I bought 2 boxes. I was going to sell them, but I'll do it with you, just to keep her company. And I tell you, Pat is now like 30 pounds plus off. I have never been this responsive to exercise before since I was in my 20s. I'm now 57. And my waistline's never been this low. So, anyway, the objective is, I like what Longo came up with his fasting mimicking diet, but here's the information. So you should be able to see that. This is a thick piece of paper. I highlighted it as I was going, but he essentially talks about the fuel of the mitochondria being, if you can stop the fuel or decrease the fuel, you'll give the cells a break, and you might be able to sweep all the body of its crappy stuff. So crappy stuff builds up. Cells that I just mentioned to you, cells that are still lingering around and they're about to change into cancer, if you destroy them because you triggered them by the fasting and mimicking or just intermittent fasting. I think this is Longo's paper from, no, this is a more recent paper. So there's another paper I have from a long time ago where he's just testing out proteins. But going through calorie restriction, somewhere it's over here, it is a master switch to tell the body to pay attention to what it's doing, get rid of the old cells, and turn on stem cells. So stem cells are those cells that are the opposite of cancer, the opposite of inflammation. Stem cells are the baby cells that can turn into any cell you want. You'll hear about it in orthopedics because doctors, orthopedic surgeons, if they have a knee that doesn't really need surgery but needs to rebuild because it's really bone on bone, sometimes you'll take your cells, spin them down, and get the baby cells or stem cells and put them back in your own knee. And that supposedly will turn into what your knee needs if it's in there, like cartilage, or the cover of the patella, or a tendon being non-frayed anymore. So that's a very basic way to apply prolotherapy. There's a guy's clinic in Oak Brook, Ross Hauser, who does much more than that, much more than stem cells, a whole bunch of other things to get the body to heal itself up. So if you can get the body to express less disease because you introduce it to intermittent fasting every once in a while, why not? I mean, watch my videos on fasting mimicking diet. You'll see that there's no other time that stem cells are supposed to come out except for, number one, when you're born, number two, after chemotherapy, or in the case of intermittent fasting, when you go back and refeed. So I think it's a great thing to turn off mTOR and AMPK and IGF, or control the IGF-1, and that sirtuins I was talking about. If you can turn all of them down, great. And you don't need medicine for it. It's just intermittent fasting. So intermittent fasting is not that big of a deal. If you think about it, most of us do it on Easter. Most of us do it when we're running late on Monday, and you hardly eat anything until you go home and you're famished and it's too late to eat anything, so you just go to sleep. So we've all done it, but if you do it in a scientific way, that's proven, 5-day fast, then you might have a better response. The expected response, higher chances for the expected response. So I always talk about Walter Longo because I just love the way his information is put together. I like his trials, I like the data, the results, and I like the results on me and my patients too. So, but there's also other options in case you don't like fasting. Sometimes switching over to a ketosis diet or becoming keto adapted would be something you might want to try. So this is from the Department of Neurology at University of Kansas, and you probably know a lot of people who do keto, and keto does, in a sense, change the fuel source of what the brain, whether it's brand new brain or the aged brain of Alzheimer's disease, the brain requires and is usually basing its needs on fuel sources on glucose. So the problem is when you don't have enough glucose around because you haven't been eating in a while, in a couple hours, your brain's going to say, I'm getting low on fuel, you better give me something. So you have the cravings, and when you have cravings, you hunt for food, and usually when you're waiting and you really have bad cravings, you'll hunt for the wrong food because the brain says, okay, we're in starvation now, so I need just something fast. And what's fast? Fast food. Fast food because you think it'll be fast, and you think it'll be cheap, and you think it'll be tasty, but most of us I have regret. When I eat fast food, if I do eat fast food, I'll usually have regret, and I'll probably enjoy it for the time, like I used to with my steak, egg, and cheese bagels when I used to work for Central DuPage Hospital. But I paid for it. I developed atrial fibrillation, fibromyalgia, and a couple other things. So I don't do that anymore because I have that memory of what happened to me. Some people who don't have an experience of that, they won't notice until it's too late, and they either have disease like Alzheimer's disease or they have a heart problem. So I do think that the ketosis diet works. I like the work of Volek and Finney. I think the information is great. There's a lot of ketosis or keto followers, and if you just look at the science, the idea is that if you decrease the amount of need the brain has for glucose and allow it to taste the ketone bodies, beta-hydroxybutyrate, all either garnished from just eating a mostly fat-based diet, or if you have a mixed diet like the Atkins or modified Atkins, well-formulated ketosis diet would be fine, but you can sometimes take exogenous ketones, whether they're in salts or esters. Esters are super expensive and they taste nasty, but they're great for test taking because they supercharge your brain. That's a lot of fuel going straight to your brain. The brain can utilize, so the bottom line is the brain can utilize glucose or ketone bodies. But in the case where you're not used to eating ketone bodies because you are eating Western American diet, sometimes it takes a little bit of time before you switch over. So having cycles of fasting mimicking diet where you go into ketosis, that's what we're doing. I'm on my 5th day now. I'm pretty much in ketosis. And that helps with regards to stopping craving, giving you satiety. But it also helps to turn off inflammation. So one, you have another fuel source to the brain, and the brain will work better. So the memory deficit, cool study, but the memory deficit's improved. It was just a hunch by these guys at the Department of Neurology, but the memory deficit's improved. Whether it's statistically significant, I don't care, man. I mean, if you have to take care of an aging relative, and you're there all night, and that person doesn't want to sleep, that is exhausting. So and they don't even know you, or they don't remember what they just did. That was with my dad when he was passing away in the ICU. Every 5 minutes he would say, "What am I doing here?" And then be agitated until he falls asleep, and then he'd wake up again, and same thing. So it gets to be frustrating. But if he would have got, a different fuel source, maybe those cells that were kind of dying, he had a stroke, dying or not working properly and used to glucose. Maybe if I gave them something else of a fuel source, you see. If the brain is damaged, a lot of inflammation, then that means usually the mitochondria won't work well. So I talked about mitochondria being the powerhouse, the converting cell, the part of the cell. Well, if the mitochondria aren't working well, even if in the brain of a Alzheimer's disease patient or a stroke disease patient, and you give that patient glucose, it's still not going to work well because the mitochondria aren't working well. This is a great book. If you like to read or dive into mitochondria, he's an ND, which is a naturopath. I like the NDs. I think they have successfully navigated the insurance business to avoid medical insurance and yet provide a great service to the community. So a great book on mitochondria. But if your mitochondria aren't working and you try to flood a Alzheimer's disease patient with glucose and proper eating, it won't work because your mitochondria are screwed up. So sometimes if you give those mitochondria, those neurons, another fuel source like fat, like in the last study I showed you, you might have the brain work better. So you can do it a couple of different ways. MCT oil is a way. MCT oil, it provides you a different fuel source. I did an unboxing of this oil before, and I would usually suggest it to my patients who are stuck on sugar and creamer in the morning in their coffee and use this instead. Problem is, sometimes getting into ketosis needs a little bit of guidance. I had a problem with my gut. I also have IBS. I don't care if I tell you. And I couldn't tolerate it. I probably didn't formulate it properly, but because I was very happy with what I'm doing as a vegan, intermittent faster. So the other ways to do, aside from MCT oil, would be like a modified Atkins, coconut oil. Sometimes a low glycemic index diet will also help if you know what to do with that, but if you don't, you'll probably have to get help with trying to figure that one out. So I like the keto guys. I think that what's interesting with this study, is that they found that the brains, when initiating the ketosis type eating or the adaptation phase, which sometimes takes up to 6 weeks if you're good, sometimes sooner, but they found that the brain cells will start to take in about 25% more alternative fuel source instead of glucose ketones or ketone bodies at the third day. That's why I always tell people I crash on the 3rd day of the fasting mimicking diet because I can't exercise. I tried to exercise. This time I didn't. But the 3rd day is usually when the brain says, hey, there's no energy. Then it gives you the brain farts, the runs, the memory, the irritability because it's not used to using ketones. We all have a lot of ketones available if you have extra tummy fat. But if the brain's not used to using that fuel source, it will be a hard switch over. Usually by the 4th day, the brain is now 70% using ketones in a 70% manner, or 70% fuel source, instead of glucose, because number one, the glucose sources are running out, you're burning them all up. Number two, body starts to really turn on. The liver starts to turn on. The fat cells start to turn on and break down fat. You give triglycerides, and then free fatty acids, and that gets changed into ketone bodies. And then when you have ketone bodies, it's almost the same thing as putting a lot of this stuff in. That means you're fat adapted, and your brain just fully uses that fuel source. And you'll see this mind-opening part, especially if you don't have Alzheimer's disease or memory issues. You just concussion, maybe you're concussed, or you have a traumatic brain injury. There will be a beautiful wave of memory that comes your way on the 3rd or 4th day of the ketogenic, starting a ketogenic diet, or going into a fasting mimicking diet. So, so I would say stick with it. If you can't do ketogenic diet, try to maybe drizzle a little bit, just dash a little bit of oil, whether it's MCT oil, extra virgin olive oil, coconut oil, fat. Just give it a little try in your diet. You might be able to get to almost like a modified Atkins type diet, and that'll still get benefit, and your brain will still have a sense or a taste of a different fuel source, and it might work better. The classic one, the classic diet, that, yeah, you can see that. Classic diet, this is out of Rush and Harvard, was the MIND diet. Now, I talked about in my high blood pressure lecture, the DASH diet. I wasn't impressed by the DASH diet. Dietary intervention for stopping hypertension. But here they have found some nice information stating, Rush and Harvard, stating that a Mediterranean and DASH kind of diet will help with cognitive decline. So it's specifically called the Mediterranean Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay, MIND diet. Veggies, nuts, berries, whole grains, fish, poultry, wine, and even some olive oil. So the bottom line is that they found that it did help. It helped easier. It was, they said that comparing it to other diets, if you have a high adherence for the other diets, you'll probably have an impact on AD, or Alzheimer's disease. But if you had just a moderate following of the MIND diet, so hopefully you got that. You can look it up on your own, NIH. If you have a moderate following of the MIND diet, you too would have the same benefits of following the other ones. So I think it was worth a trial. And again, the MIND diet is essentially a good diet compared to the Western diet. And the Western diet is just so crappy. I didn't notice that in my 20s because I ate anything. In college, we had a punch card, and everybody at the dorms on Friday would have extra money on the punch card, so we would all bring trays of crap. We'd go to the cafeteria, surrender the last punch of the week, and just get a whole bunch of crap. Pizzas, pretzels, sodas, anything that was boxed, and bring it back to donuts, bring it back to the dorm and stuff it in the fridge or put it on top because it wouldn't go bad for the whole weekend, and just combine that with beer, and that's college. So, and I think that we can get through that because number one, our digestive fires are so attuned to just growing, and hormones are so on fire that we're somewhat bulletproof. But that, you know, that freshman 15, that extra weight gain that occurs, especially when you finish college and you go into med school and you go into residency, or you go into a master's program, or you have kids, you don't get to exercise anymore, you don't get to sleep anymore, you have more stress, and then the crap comes. So that might be sometimes the first steps in having the beginning of Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease doesn't just hit when you have the memory issues. You can usually see, if you follow the studies, you can usually see the changes on mind, the MRI of the mind, MRI of the brain, even before the patients start to manifest memory issues. So it's starting before, but it's just not realized. So if it's there before the memory goes, then you know that it's a progressive disease. So if you can beat that, and that's not just genetics. So even if you have the genes in your mom and dad, it can actually be induced by a crappy diet. So crappy diet, no exercise, sedentary life, it can be induced. Alzheimer's disease can be induced by that. Same thing with MS. MS is thought to be inflammatory or autoimmune. You know what? If you throw enough crap into your life, you will have every disease in the world. I hate to say that, but so, and this is an example of what you might think is healthy. You see pictures down here. There's the old guy, Quaker Oats guy. It looks pretty healthy, right? Until you look at the label. So if you look at the label, there are like 37 grams of carbohydrate and 16 grams or so of fat, last time I checked. No, sugar. 14 grams of sugar. Sorry about the fat thing. 14 grams of sugar and 30 something of carbohydrate. 37 of carbohydrate. This is crap. You would think that this tiny thing is okay for breakfast. It's not okay for breakfast. It's bad for breakfast. It's bad for any time of the day because of the stuff that it has. So after all I mentioned in the studies, what turns on serotonins and PK, AMPK and mTOR, what turns all that stuff on is this. So that's why I wanted to show you this. Sugar is just not a good thing to have in your diet. You got to get it out. This kind of diet versus, like, if you've ever been in my clinic, I always suggest oil. I think it balances out. I think that it's important to have a good nutrition following, but as far as supplementation, I'm big on supplementation. I don't care what my colleagues say, but there ain't going to be any problems with taking DHA. This happens to be this is vegetarian DHA, but you can get DHA in fish oil. You just have to check out my video on fish oil, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So you can have omega-3 oil this way to offset. Omega-3 is an anti-inflammatory versus omega-6, which is pro-inflammatory. And we're lacking in a standard American diet or Western diet, we're lacking omega-3. So please, if worst case scenario, if you don't want to follow like my 82-year-old guy, just throw this in. It might neutralize a couple things. In addition, if you don't like Indian food and you don't want to just take in turmeric root, curcumin. Turmeric has always been touted and researched as being a great anti-inflammatory. India has one of the lowest rates of Alzheimer's disease in the world. Whether that attributes to curcumin and turmeric in their diet or not, I'm not sure, but it ain't gonna hurt. I think I did an unboxing of this too, so these are my two favorites. I follow Consumer Labs, and I like what they have to offer, independent company for testing. So, final thing is, those of you who are on carnivore diet, you gotta be careful. I think one of the cool things, who did this? Yeah, this is Longo too. This is Longo from a long time ago. Yeah, 2013. This is before he came up with the FMD. He was still researching, but he didn't release his book yet and his data. But this is before. And Longo found that if you went through protein restriction, you would also have improvement in IGF-1 and phosphorylation of tau. Again, tau and amyloid bodies are the things you find on the brains of Alzheimer's disease patients. And just decreasing, this is from 2013, decreasing the protein restriction, hopefully you can see that, decreasing the protein restriction already showed just by 4 months. That's why I think that the information on his fasting mimicking diet, which came out in 2017, at least tells you try 3 months at a time. But the 4-month period is when of protein restriction was when they found that it decreased the turning on of IGF-1 and those tau bodies. So the objective is to help decrease the tau bodies from forming, help decrease the hits that you get of IGF-1, maybe, and assuming that I can extrapolate because I know what his new studies showed. I don't have that from cell metabolism, but decreasing protein also decreased mTOR. So decreasing protein decreases mTOR, thus his fasting mimicking diet is mostly plant-based. Decreasing sugar decreased the AMPK. So both of those things are like fuels for that bad pathway into the cell and into the mitochondria to produce those free radicals. Energy, yes, free radicals you don't want. But if you can turn off that whole pathway, why not? And you don't have to starve like a water-only fast. You can just take it easy and follow what he suggests. That's 1,000 calories on day 1 and then about 750 calories on day 2 to 5. Once a month for 3 months. Why not? I mean, it's not going to hurt. It'll hurt your pocketbook if you buy the Prolon box. But I did it the first time with whole food approach. I just measured out myself. Probably didn't measure it properly. I'm going to do it now until the new year, 2020. And I bet you I'll still have massive gains in size. I should do before and after, but I'm a little shy on showing my body. Anyway, so those of you who, that's what I wanted to just tell you, that there's ways to fight even before. If you're given, if your neurologist is taking away control and you think that you're not in control anymore, and or your memory's going, and or you're a caregiver for somebody, and the only option you have is taking a medicine, I think there's more. At least if you can change the diet, because a lot of us can change the diet. Even vegetarians, vegans can change their diet to be a little bit more clean. If you change your diet, maybe sprinkle a couple other things figured out by data, precautions not to cause any further damage, get some good sleep, use helmets when you have to, exercise, stay hydrated, and avoid other crappy people around you, you probably will improve, because it's easy to improve when we're at such a disadvantage from just one thing, diet. And we're at such a disadvantage from not exercising. I know if you have parents who work dual income households and everybody's working 50 hours a week, there's not much time to do anything, and you have to just survive. But you also have to know what's coming later on. So it won't happen to everybody, but I have a feeling that with the baby boomer population blossoming now, and a lot of type 2 diabetics starting to become medicine takers, Alzheimer's disease is considered type 3 diabetes. I think Brown University, somebody from Brown came up with that, because of the fact that the cell didn't take the glucose and utilize it properly, and there's way too much insulin, and insulin resistance was there. So again, it goes back to the science of what I talked about before, IGF-1, mTOR, glucose, ketones. So hope all this stuff didn't get you in the weeds. If you have any comments, put them down below. Don't forget to subscribe to me and hit the alert button to find out when I do new videos. And hopefully, if you know anybody that has Alzheimer's disease, or you know a caregiver that's just getting burned out, or if you just know somebody with memory issues and thinking about nutrition change, share this with them. Otherwise, I'll see you at the next tutorial.